Hello, folks. Welcome to Walking on the Lean Side, part of It Matters Radio. And I have a great friend visiting with me again today. Lawrence Fedwa is a writer for the Washington Post and been published many places. And one of the things I like most about him is that he and I don't agree on a lot of things. And that makes for a much more interesting conversation. Wouldn't you say so, Larry?
Yes, especially since it's in a friendly mode.
Right.
It shows that opposites can in fact get along.
Yes. So, for folks, I just thought we'd chat about a whole bunch of things today. But then this morning, I was looking at my news, and of course, as people know, anyone who knows me, I'm very big on following the news from all over the world. And I saw something from Italy. Did you happen to see the news from Italy today?
I did not, no.
Okay. Well, it seems that the Venetians, the people who live in the Venice and that area, and the Lombards, the people who live in what's called Lombardy, which is centers around Milan, are talking about not breaking away from Italy, but kind of deconstructing a little bit the Italian national state so that because they don't trust Rome, they feel that their money is going down to the poorer regions of the south where it is being wasted and corruption and bad management. And so just as in Spain, where the Catalans around Barcelona,
In California,
yeah, California, to a certain extent in California, yeah.
the Republic of California.
Yeah, and then many Moldova. There's a break, and of course they're splitting up. Belgium is talking about always talking about splitting up into two sections. And I was wondering, what is your take on this growing localized nationalism in a world that has been going global for so long?
Well, I think that's a very relevant condition. Frankly, this is probably I would see it as a dissatisfaction with the way that they are living now, and it's primarily economic. In not in all cases, but it's. If they were all happy and rich and having all the free time they were used to in the past, they probably wouldn't be trying to secede or whatever you call it. So I would say that it's probably a kind of a visceral reaction against globalization, which has been very spotty in its benefits. Although, as we said the last time, there have been a lot of benefits all over in various places in the world, but apparently in northern Italy, they don't agree with that.
Well, you see, this is where you and I can have some disagreement. Good. See, I see it just the opposite. It's the people who are succeeding who generally are unhappy. For example, if you look in Italy, the Lombard region accounts for something like 30% of the national income of Italy and accounts for about, I think, 10% of the population. And their economy is growing. It's one of the best economies in Europe, but it's in that region. And they're saying, hey, we don't want to share anymore. We don't want to give.
I agree with that. I think that's exactly right.
Well, so globalization, the people who globalization are helping are the ones who are least interested in others.
But isn't that always the truth? The richest, the royalty were never very happy about the plebes or the serfs either.
Right. Yeah, the people who have don't want to give to those who don't have. Of course, that's not the only reason for separation. But in Spain, it's certainly part of it. The Catalan area is Barcelona, very successful comparatively. Now, in other regions, like in in Moldova, it's more about custom and language. You have this little enclave of people who are unique. Of course, in Belgium, it's the French speaking versus the Flemish speaking. It's more cultural. But one of the things that bothers me is it seems to me that as the world gets more connected, it's causing more local disconnection.
Well, they certainly see how the other half lives, and probably in a much more dramatic way than in the past. Mm-hmm. But you also have to mention the areas that have religious differences as well.
Yeah.
That's been true well in Central Europe, particularly, I guess. In fact, there's a big one going on in what's the southern the Sri Lanka, I guess it is.
Yeah. Of course, it's kind of less now, but yeah, the Tamil uprising in Sri Lanka was horrific.
Well, no, there's a big one going on right now in what used to be southern India. I can't recall the exact geography of it right now.
Southern India, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there have always been those kinds of separations by religion,
mm-hmm.
and I think maybe it's your idea about the separation that's now starting to occur and being more economically motivated. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Oh, I think it's something.
I don't know what we do about it.
I think it's something else. What I guess where I'm going is, I think that as the world becomes more globalized, we don't see ourselves as needing the people next door so much, or caring as much about the next door. And let me go to another area.
Yeah, but look at the hurricanes. Yeah. Look at what happened in Texas and Louisiana, Costa Rica, Mexico City. When we really get a traumatic experience like that, there seems to be a lot of neighborliness and sharing and caring.
It's interesting because you left out Puerto Rico. And yesterday I took part in a fundraiser for the people in Puerto Rico. And you know that a majority of the people in one town outside of Houston, they did a survey, and a majority of the people, according to what I read, said, well, we shouldn't be helping them, we should be helping Americans. Referring to the people of Puerto Rico, who of course are all American citizens, and in fact have a higher rate of participation in the military than the people from Texas.
Yeah, but I don't think that's, well, I don't have any proof of that, but my impression is that that's not commonly the common experience or the common perception. I mean, as a country, we put an awful lot of money and time and effort and people into that. The problem, by the way, as you know, in Puerto Rico was very different from any place else because there was no local infrastructure to respond to the help from outside. I mean, it's just a devastating situation now.
Yeah, really
you're assuming that there's a certain amount of prejudice that's operative. I don't.
No,
I don't know that.
I don't know that it's prejudice. I think what it is, it might be, but I think what it
is, ignorance.
That's certainly part of it. But I think there's this whole thing, there's a whole different texture to the world. Let me go back to California for a minute, because I think this is kind of related. I was listening to a fascinating story the other day on NPR about groundwater and the aquifer under the Central Valley of California. Now, this is the most important agricultural area of the world. They account for huge amounts of our food production in this country. And what's happened is that instead of producing things like lettuce and other vegetables, they have moved into the global market. And the global market, the best things to sell, one of the best things is nuts. So huge amounts of land that was once, say, lettuce, is now being planted to almond trees. Almonds are incredible sellers. Pistachios are incredible sellers. Now, on the surface, that sounds, well, fine, okay. That's what Ricardo was talking about, and when he talked about relative advantage, that's what trade is supposed to do. But it turns out that nut trees require huge amounts of water. So basically, in order to feed the global, we're destroying the aquifer. And when that goes, what happens is the land settles, develops sinkholes, and then settles and settles. The water gets harder and harder to reach, and eventually, in the not too distant future, hydrologists are telling us, well, we're not going to be able to farm there anymore. So, is globalization in its way destroying the ties? So it's kind of an interesting thing. I'm kind of wondering about globalization as a positive force in the world.
Well, the last time we talked, you were an ardent defender.
Well, I love getting these things that are not clear, NAFTA, I think, on the most part, has helped. But is globalization necessarily a good thing?
Well, as we said last time, if the educational and training of the people that are being challenged to undertake new and foreign types of technologies and tasks and jobs and so on, if all of that were being equally distributed around the world, I think we would be in favor of the whole thing. But unfortunately, seemed like the main motive for all of the moving from the Philippines, from Japan to the Philippines to Vietnam, and it's people following the companies that are following the cheaper labor, and that if that's as the main motivator, that doesn't sound very good. that sounds like maybe capitalism run amok. I mean, if capitalism doesn't have democracy to countervail it and keep it in some kind of control, it can get very, very vicious.
And on that note, we'll be right back. welcome back to Walking on the Ween Side, and Lawrence Fedor and myself, and we were just talking a little bit about globalization and trade. And so here you and I finding ourselves in agreement, I think, in a way, that we both feel there has to be a counterbalance between business and public interest. That the democracy and government through democracy has an important place in controlling, because greed by itself, whether we're talking about the depletion of the aquifers of California or we're talking about good, solid people in places like, say, Japan losing employment to the Philippines because, we can get cheaper labor, that there has to be something countervailing that, or in the long run, people will get hurt.
Yeah, I think I've written quite a bit about this sort of thing. Basically, the prevailing concept of the public good was really incarnated in certainly in Western culture and to a large extent also in Asia. Through religious institutions, and they were supposed to be very trustworthy and very advocates of justice and distribution and charity and so on, and that has, to a large extent, and the theory of that, from kind of a simplistic view, is that the authority goes from God to the religious institution, and then it's supposed to be distributed to the people. Mm-hmm. And democracy says no, power goes from God to the people, and from the people to the institution, and therefore it is a political issue that is openly political, which is, in our case, we look at it as a democracy. So people talk about, and I do, I'm one of them, talk about democratic capitalism. What we mean is that we finally got capitalism. Capitalism was really, it has a lot of good things to it, but it also needs to be checked, because human nature being what it is, there's a lot of greed and a lot of cruelty and a lot of ignoring of other people's needs in the human race. So somebody's got to stand up against it. And if you get the people that have the power to appoint those representatives to do that, and they have the guns, then it all works. And of course, if those representatives who have the guns don't do what they're elected to be doing, you got a real problem. And that's part of what we have to face every day.
Yeah. So now, how do we define the good, the public good? I mean, this goes back to Socrates, right? The state and Aristotle. What is the nature of the good?
You might have to go back to Adam and Eve, actually.
Well, I don't know that they found it.
Well, I guess my simplistic answer to that would be that the public good is what the people, in a democracy anyway, is what the people say it is, and that if you take it on a theoretical basis, the people that get elected should be the people that the public in general see them as advocating the things that they want out of life.
Well, but now
we know that doesn't always work. But
he didn't actually get a huge majority until he rigged the elections. But Adolf Hitler was elected. He represented the people. God help us.
Yeah, but he didn't give them what they asked for. Basically what he did was he promised that they would defeat this terrible disinflation that they had by becoming powerful again, that part was true.
Yeah,
but
he did.
That wasn't a very good solution.
But he also said very publicly, it was quite public forum, we have to get rid of the Juden and the other corruptions, and we have to reclaim that which is the greater Germany. And he did go after all of those things. But you want another example? I mean, there've been a lot of Mussolini, Franco. I mean, these were people
Yeah, but Ken, what these guys promise, and the basis, or at least what the people understand them to be promising, and then what they actually do once they get power, are a lot of times very different things.
Well, to some degree, but I don't think in Hitler's case or in Mussolini's case it was. What's his name?
They're appealing to the baser ideas or the basic part of human nature, I guess.
Yeah,
there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I think that the problem is, how do we get the people to know good from evil? Now, you talked about religion before, and I guess we should tell folks you were actually in seminary for a while, were you not?
Yeah, too long.
Too long. But I mean, you've got some training in like thinking about like Thomas Aquinas, people like that, right?
That's true.
Yeah. Do you think?
Well, they had it all figured out on paper.
Do you think that helped you to feel that you understood what was good and what was not good?
Yes, and that's what we call ethics. The whole study of moral behavior and from the moral point of view. And in Christianity in general, the guide for that has been the Bible. But it's a lot of stories that need to be interpreted, and of course the interpretations have varied significantly throughout history.
Yeah, the Bible includes slavery and includes stoning people.
Bigamy.
Well, yeah. So how do we as people identify what is good, and then B, pass that knowledge on in a meaningful way to our children? These are important questions.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't give you a one-sentence answer to that.
Well, that's okay. I can't give you a one-sentence answer either.
It's culture, basically. I mean, well, you can say it's religion, or religion is part of culture. And I think every culture has its norms that are generally accepted by most of the people, even if they're not always practiced. At least they're considered. People know right from wrong based upon what they're taught and observed as children and as adults. But I don't think there is an absolute on that basis, because you see cultural activities in different cultures that other cultures consider barbarous or
right.
Terrible. Like the whole idea of well, you can go to Genghis Khan or you can go to Muhammad, and you've got a warrior community. In fact, the American Indians were like that too, for the most part. So I don't know that there's any absolute answer to that. I think most people. I think there's some basics. Like, for example, I think most cultures believe that families ought to be provided for. The weak, the children, and they used to feel that the women were part of that. Recently, I'm not so sure that women are still the ones to be taken care of. But anyway, I think generally speaking, everybody in the world would believe that their family ought to be taken care of, which means
the community ought to take care of my family. But because I'm selling my pistachios to Qatar and not worrying about the aquifer here in Central California, do I want to take care of the family of the people down the street?
You are selling the pistachios because you want to take care of your family.
Yeah, but at what point do we
And
lose sight of the family down the street because we're so busy worrying about? And that's one of those issues. Getting back
it,
to globalization, is it
it's
going to?
almost universal.
Well, is it?
I think most people are a lot more concerned with their own family than they are the family down
Yeah,
the street. Now, there are exceptions to that, but if you want to say day to day, we live in microcosms.
yeah.
We
But I
don't
might
live.
want to feed. I might want to feed my child or my elderly parent or whoever before I feed my neighbor's
Yes,
children.
everybody would feel that.
But I think globalization, and one of the problems I have with what's happening in our economy and the emphasis on money, is that we no longer even care about our neighbor's child. And we don't care about educating them either.
Well, you say we. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know who the we is. I mean, I think we, all of us, want those things to happen. The the problems are many: practical, distraction, um, lack of resources, funding, particularly. I don't, there are a lot of things that distract us. But I think most people would say, would you rather have a neighborhood or a city or a country where everybody is well fed, everybody is well taken care of, everybody has medical access, and so on and so forth. I think everybody, most people, even in Asia, would agree with that concept.
Yeah, as long
Of
as it
course,
doesn't
of
come
course,
out of their pocket.
of course, when we finally try to apply it, it gets a little bit more complicated.
Well, we're going to be right back and have a nice little break here. Welcome back to Walking on the Ween Side, and Lawrence Fedwa, my very good friend and guest today. Now, We mentioned you went to seminary, and I wanted to get back to that a little bit. You said for too long. Obviously, it didn't hurt you because you got a good education. But why was it too long, and why did you leave?
Well, there's a book that just came out today about that.
I know that.
The why was it too long? It was too long because all of the it was 9 years, by the way, from the age of 14 to 22, but going on 23, which is my entire youth, and so there was the issues that there were two periods in which I had serious doubts about whether I should stay in that seminary or not. The first time was the first year of college, and at that time the issue was not so much theoretical as it was I just felt like nothing that I was doing was I had two brothers that were at Notre Dame, and they were having a lot of fun. I wasn't having any fun. I didn't know what fun was. But I bought the whole package about the priesthood and the church and the whole thing. I wrote a lot of poetry about it, as a matter of fact. And but because the counseling at the seminary was rather narrow, my counselor felt like his job was to keep me in the seminary, not so much what was good for me, but
not to help you explore who you were, but to
exactly. And he was a good man, and he was doing what he thought was right, but it wasn't right. But then 5 years later, I went to work in a rectory for the summer, and I began to socialize and see what real priests were actually doing, and it was really, really a shattering of all the ideals, all the stuff that was being taught in the seminary as to what that was, what being a priest was supposed to be, and how you were supposed to think and act. It was just not being followed, and I just saw the life is lonely and very boring and very and the people, frankly, pretty mediocre. Mm-hmm. So I then that's when I really decided that I had to go. So I did, and then I had a pretty I had a pretty adventurous next couple of years. I did all kinds of stuff, and I found a wonderful woman, and I married her, and so we've been married all this time.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned there's a book that you just came out today by you, and the name of the book is
Inside the Early Years.
Okay.
And the subtitle is A Catholic Youth Searches for His Place in the Sun.
Okay, and folks, you can check that out on Amazon, of course.
Yep.
Okay, now getting back to what was it that you saw the priests doing that you felt was not in keeping with what they were supposed to be doing?
Well, what they were supposed to be doing, if you listen to the idealism that was being preached by the seminary itself, mm-hmm. It was a completely selfless vocation. You were giving up your own family and your own wife, and your purpose was to be a complete servant to humanity or to people in the way that Jesus was portrayed in the New Testament.
Right, and therefore by serving your fellow man, you're serving God.
Exactly. And when I got to see what they really do, I saw a lot of gambling and a lot of
Drinking.
Some womanizing,
Some
not
womanizing.
nearly as much as happened later, but
Yeah.
and it was just very routine. The talk was not about anything uplifting. It was always kind of rough. They played a lot of golf. It was like a bunch of guys that are semi-retired and don't have a lot of stimulation intellectually either. That's true. That's not true of all of them, but
Okay,
some of the ones.
other than not being married, it sounds like you could be talking about a bunch of politicians too.
Well, or military.
Well,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it is it's a characteristic of many physicians. There are many people that want to dedicate their lives to helping other people. It's not unique to Catholic priesthood by any means,
No, of course not. But
but
when we are called to serve, when we feel a vocational call to serve others, whether we cloak it in patriotism, whether we cloak it in religiosity, whatever we cloak it in, um, that's a very different thing from going through the motions and playing a lot of golf.
exactly, yeah, and then when I came through this whole, I got into a lot of stuff. I was a singer, and when I was in Europe, I used to, I got jobs occasionally in these little nightclubs they have over there. Then for a while, I was a clothes model, and oh, it's just a lot of stuff. So, a door-to-door salesman. I almost got involved in a scam. I would call it a swindle. I got out in time just before I got beat up, but so I had a lot of those kind of things later on. But after I pulled through all of that, I discovered that there are other stars to follow. It is a serious thing. I started out as a teacher, and even when I got into business later on, it was always from the point of view that you were trying to do something that would help people. If you're trying to sell, like we were selling computer-based education. Well, the reason I got into that was because of what happened in Baltimore, where we found out that kids were breaking into a school that had one of the first computer-based education systems that was ever fielded, named Plato. Well, I thought, I've been trying to raise. I started at college, and so I had been raising money, and I found out, and it was right in that era where they had you could go to college without actually having graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a lot of kids that were fundamentally illiterate.
And you were trying to reach out to help.
And I raised millions of dollars to help those people.
Mm-hmm.
But I found out that there really wasn't there was no transferable way to do it, because usually it meant, especially with the men, the boys, it meant you had to have almost a 24-hour matron trying to help them every time their confidence failed or their skill failed or whatever. And that's not, and these ladies that it was usually women, and they played them out in about a year and a half, and they were done. And so if you could get something automated to do that repetition and all that sort of thing. Well, anyway, so I found that there are a lot of other ways to try to help people.
No. One of the things, though, that I hear the theme coming here through here, a good person, because we are back on that Platonic, yes. What is the good person, what is the good state? A good person is somebody who wants to serve others, but the other has to be servable. Yes. And therein we get back to that priest who, having heard the same confession from the same people so many times, at what point does that priest say, God, I need a drink?
There was a lot of that too.
Rescue me. And herein lies one of the problems, forbearance. Okay, and getting back around to our beginning, when we talk about, for example, okay, I live in Milan. I'm making a good living. I'm getting taxed. The money is going down to Sicily or Naples. I perceive that a lot of that is going into corrupt practices, etc. And I have to forbear. I have to continue. And of course, every now and then, people say enough with the forbearance. Enough. I've given enough. I want things to be different. And so one of the things that fascinates me, and just thought I'd ask you if it's fascinating you as well, that we are living in a time where forbearance as a quality seems to be ending.
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, it's a relative statement, and we don't really have very good evidence of what it was like in the 16th century, for example. I don't know if forbearance is less. I do know that there is. I agree with you. There is a limit to it, and how do you? I mean, I think that the way you overcome some of the problems that people habitually have is making their basic life easier, not so much from the point of view of labor, but physical labor. For example, most of the automation that we have invented in the last 200 years has basically been to avoid having to do these tasks ourselves. You know, we don't dig wells by hand anymore. And if you look at what it took to survive, I always use the example of women in the just immediate post-Civil War era. You know, they suddenly they got can openers, and they got various little things that made their lives easier.
And we'll be right back to follow up on that. So welcome back to Walking on the Lean Side, and we had to take a quick break there, but you were just telling us about women in the post-Civil War era getting labor-saving devices.
Yes, like can openers, and a lot of the things that they used to do, you realize, you know, just to survive as a human being, if you were naked and afraid in the forest in the prehistoric era, you spent almost all your time trying to survive. And as we've had more and more automation come into our lives, particularly in the last couple hundred years, we don't have to do that anymore. And I think that's, for example, the women's movement, the whole temperance started with temperance, but it got to be women's liberation in the 19th century. That's when women had time to do other things than try to survive. And that's been the blessing of our technology. But as you point out, it also has its negative effects. And I think part of that is impersonalization, if there is such a word. It's depersonalizing human contact.
The creation of enemy, to use, I think it was Durkheim's term, something like that. Mm-hmm.
So, back to your point, the idea that we don't have as much forbearance, I think we have less experience of real experience of real people face to face, and that I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah. I think that may be part of it. That because we, even in like back in Victorian times or even before that, one of the things was that the working class, the laboring people, lived in proximity to the rich people. People knew each other.
That's right.
John Hancock may have been the richest person in the colony, but he was friends with and knew Sam Adams, who was one of the poorest. I mean, he couldn't keep a $5 in his pocket, but they knew each other.
Yeah.
Today we don't know one another. Today we don't have that personal interaction, which gets us back to one of the functions of the church, of religion, which is to bring people together across those kind of divides. And I wanted to just mention one of my personal heroes, a man named Peter Marshall. Peter Marshall.
Yeah, he was the chaplain of the Congress?
The Senate, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a Presbyterian preacher. And this was just at the beginning of the Second World War, actually. And Peter Marshall was famous, although for some people perhaps infamous, in that when he'd get up to pray before the Senate, he would actually say something. He would say, let us focus on this issue. Let us focus on our concern for these people. And now I think the church, and I like your take as a seminarian, an ex-seminarian, it seems like the church is no longer, religion is no longer telling us to focus on those kind of issues, but rather is growing inward. And that is part of that lack of forbearance, is that the faith itself is tearing people away from this awareness.
Well, I don't think I would buy that altogether. I think that's one of the things that practicing religion, in the sense of going to church and being involved with other people in that environment, is a survivor. It's almost opposite of. It's almost an opponent, if you will, of the depersonalization that technology is bringing about. It's also, by the way, one of the that longing or that lack in our normal social discourse.
Yeah, except for those religions,
is because it's leading to some really radical types of religious, quasi-religious activities.
Yeah, it's those people who are creating these religious positions that are saying basically, "Oh, it's only us." There's a new wave of extreme Calvinism, if you will, going on in this country, and that says we are the saved, and the rest of you can go to hell. And I find that very, very scary.
That's the most succinct definition of Calvinism I ever heard, I think.
Well, Lawrence Federer, you have has always been a great guest on Walking on the Wean Side. I hope you'll come back. And folks, do look for the book. And the title of your book again?
Inside the Early Years by Lawrence J. Fieldwalk.
Yeah. And of course, this will take you through his struggles with becoming and then leaving the seminarian experience.
And afterwards.
And afterwards, yes. Yeah, even finding a
beautiful I thought
woman.
of calling it a love story that started in a seminary.
Okay. Thanks, folks, for joining us, and see you soon walking on the Wean Side.